Here's our song. Once again, John Stettin here in the Past the Wire, war room, studio, office, all rolled into one. Taking you past the wire in the Sport of Kings, and it's been an interesting week, and there's a couple of things to talk about, I think, as we head into the Belmont Stakes and Justify's run at joining that ever so elusive and exclusive list of Triple Crown winners. We'll talk a little bit about the Belmont. There's, like I said, a lot to talk about. So in this week's Sport of Kings update, where we take you past the wire, we're not going to spend too much time on the Belmont because we're going to do a lot more on the Belmont this week and a lot of the supporting stakes. So there'll be plenty of time to talk about that. We will touch on it briefly, though. Next 10, 12 minutes or so, we'll go through a bunch of different topics, and hope you all find it interesting. Before we get to that, remember that I and everybody at Past the Wire are proud supporters of the Permanently Disabled Jockeys Fund, and I hope you are too. It's worthy organization. These guys put a lot out there, put their necks and lives on the line all the time, and I think it's the least we can do to support them, as well as our equine athletes during their racing careers and subsequent to their racing careers. That said, let's touch briefly on the Belmont. A couple of interesting points that come to mind as we head to the Belmont Stakes. First and foremost, two issues that I think are pretty relevant, and they're contradictory to one another. One is an awful lot of really, really good horses stepped up to the plate to try and win the Belmont Stakes and cap off a Triple Crown and didn't make it. That said, historically, the Triple Crown winners have come in spurts, and over a long period of time, the Triple Crown winners have been somewhat crammed into short periods of time, where they kind of clustered together, which I find a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know that anybody can actually explain why that is, and it'll be interesting to see how that continues now that we've had American Pharaoh break a long drought a couple of years back. How's it going to play out going forward over the next couple of years, where we have a really legitimate looking prospect to Justify heading into the race with a very confident Bob Baffert and a equally and maybe even more importantly confident Mike Smith, who's very, very familiar with Belmont and riding a mile and a half at Belmont. And we'll talk more about that in another broadcast dedicated to the Belmont. But it's interesting that he's so very confident. Now let's get to some Thoroughbred Racing issues that occurred over the week, and some results, and my thoughts and takes, and the takeaways on what we saw unfold. We saw the return of an old Belmont winner, not old, but not this year, Thoroughbred at Belmont the other day in an allowance race. And I think that enthusiasm was a little skeptical going into the race. He went off 6-5 along with Timeline, co-favorite, Chad Brown's horse, who's also a nice prospect that was coming back off a layoff. Chad's horse won the race pretty easily, and Javier Castellano's riding very, very well right now. The agent move that we talked about in a prior broadcast seems to have reignited a little fire in Javier, and he is making a lot of late moves and making them count, getting that last move and that last jump, and making it count. He kind of did that with Timeline, and beat Thoroughbred. But like I said, the enthusiasm for Thoroughbred was a little tempered, at least on my part. He came back from a long layoff with an aluminum pad on. I believe he's run with that before. I didn't look it up, but even so, off a long layoff, that's not something I like to see. I don't find that encouraging. So I think that was a little bit of a tell that everything might not be 100%. Unique Bella ran off her less than perfect trip, apple blossom in over a wet track at Oaklawn Park in Hot Springs, Arkansas. She, went back to her home ground at Santa Anita, where she's almost unbeatable, and ran in the Beholder against some nice horses. Paradise Woods was in there, and Bob Baffert had that nice mare of his in there, Valdori, and it looked like a three-horse race, for the win anyway on paper, and it unfolded that way. And afterwards, a lot of people knocked Unique Bella. She looked a little laboring, coming to the wire. But hey, she had a chase and stalk Paradise Woods, who was coming out of 2 sprints. Didn't want to let her get away. Mike kept her out in the track a little bit wide, probably try and keep her relaxed. I didn't ask him or anything, but I don't think I had to. I think that was obvious. He was trying to keep her a little relaxed, a little out in the track. When she had to go after Paradise Woods, she did. She kicked away. She distanced herself from the rest of the field, and the race was pretty much over. So she might have come home a little bit slower than we want to see, and visually she might have looked a little less than poetry in motion, but she looked really good to me, and she did what she had to do, and the race, should set her up to go forward off it. I think she bounced back good, and I don't really have any reason to knock her. Thoroughbred fans and bettors can be awfully critical and expect these off the chart performances every time out. And these animals aren't machines. They're like everybody else. Every time you do a workout or play ball, you could win without playing your best game. You could have a good workout without doing your maximum output. So, I don't know. I didn't see any reason to knock her. Over at Penn National in the Penn Mile, we saw a heck of a nice performance from Hawkish. And, Hawkish is a really nice turf horse, and he looks like he's got a really good season and campaign ahead of him. But I want to talk a little bit about his trainer, Jimmy Toner, who just, has been around for so long. I mean, when I was a kid, he was training horses. And, now he's kind of known for turf horses. But I remember when he trained, a lot of dirt horses, sprinters, it didn't really matter. Jimmy Toner's been around a long time, sharp as a razor blade, and really knows what he's doing. Turf, dirt, and any other surface you probably want to throw at him. And it's really great to see him doing so well so late in his career. And, he doesn't have a lot of horses, but he comes up with some really good ones consistently. Every couple of years, you can count on him to have a really, really nice horse. And, that says something. That shows. And he's an old school guy, too. So I'm just really as impressed as can be with him. Now, and have been for many years. Going from old school, let's go to a new guy, Jonathan Thomas. If he's not on your radar yet, he should be. He's been on mine for a while, since he went out on his own. We've touched base on him on prior broadcasts. He is another one, sharp as a tack. Going to be one of the top guys in the game, no question. Already getting great horses and already delivering. Catholic boy, he upset Analyze It, who in the Pennine Ridge at Belmont, I think last Saturday. And, that was a very fluky and odd run race, granted. But Catholic boy, really showed that, he appreciated getting back to the turf. They took him off the turf to try and make a derby run. Didn't really work out. Wasn't disgraced, but didn't really work out. And now he's back on his, preferred surface. And he just really ran a big race. He went to the lead. Javier put him right on the lead, took it to Analyze It. And Analyze It passed him in the stretch. Looked like he had the race won. Javier angled him out, and like I said, he's making those last moves and making them count. He came again, got to Analyze It, and one going away. And Jonathan Thomas has got a bunch of 2-year-olds that we're probably going to see a few nice ones up at Saratoga. If he's not on your radar screen, put him on there, because he's a guy to watch, and he's getting some really nice horses from some really good outfits. So we can expect him to be doing some damage. And it's always nice to be on those bandwagons early. It's not really early anymore, but there are still some people who I'm not sure, where he fits in the scheme of things, and it's pretty high up there. Now, moving over to Analyze It, who I liked an awful lot going into that race. But let's talk a little about something else. There was a little bit of a tell that he may not be quite as good as a lot of us thought he was, myself included. But I did see that tell. I just discounted it because of what I saw on the racetrack. But sometimes a tell is a tell. Chad Brown with a good turf horse gets bet. And even the ones that don't get bet and are cold on the board are like 7, 8, 9 to 1 cold. And sometimes they win anyway. This horse went off 14 or 16 to 1 in his first race, win it pretty easily, and then went on and just to look like a lawnmower in his next couple of starts until Catholic Boy somewhat exposed him on Saturday. But that 14, 16 to 1 might have been a little bit of a tell that he might not be, all that and more. Like some of us kind of jumped on the bandwagon maybe prematurely and thought he was. So good thing about racing is you get a chance. You don't get a chance to bet a race over again, but you get a chance to regroup and rethink and reevaluate your opinion on horses. And I'm very curious to see what Analyze It does next time. If he is as good as they say with that race under his belt, he should go forward. Now, an interesting thing about that race is if you look at the splits and you look at the interior splits, Analyze It ran wicked fast interior splits and came home the last part, I think, in 12 flat. And if you look at the interior splits, and you can go on the Belmont Park website and go on Trackers and check this out for yourself, you'll see he ran some really fast interior splits that most horses would not be able to keep up and finish off. So, that said, his race is not as bad as many people think, but anytime an odds-on favorite like that gets beat, people tend to knock him. But I think it's interesting, and I'm very curious to see how that plays out going forward, and I'd love to see those two race again and see how it unfolds, because I think they're both really nice turf horses, really nice 3-year-olds, so that's going to be interesting. In the Investec Derby over in England, we saw Massar for Godolphin upset Saxon Warrior. Saxon Warrior was the highly regarded Aidan O'Brien 3-year-old that Ryan Moore had a choice to stay and ride in the prep for the Investec Derby or come to the States and ride Mendelssohn in the Kentucky Derby for the same connections. Well, we all know he rode Mendelssohn, and that didn't go according to their plan. But he did ride Saxon Warrior in the Investec Derby, which was won by Godolphin's Massar under a very heady ride by William Buick, who gives a lot of those, by the way. A lot of people knock Saxon Warrior. I mean, I even saw one of the commentators on one of the racing networks tweet out, "Oh, Saxon Warrior is a rat," which is a term that I never use for any racehorse, whether they're a $1,500 claimer or a $1.5 million stake horse. I just don't use it, but to each their own. But I mean, if you watch the race, Saxon Warrior did not have the best of trips. I'm not saying he would have won, and he certainly didn't finish like gangbusters, but when they got to the last straight, and that race, they run part of it uphill, the first part uphill, they do that in Europe, for those of you that don't know, uphill and downhill, but when they got to the last straight of that race, and Ryan Moore wanted to find a seam and wanted to, let him go, he had to steady and look for room and was in traffic and, didn't really go according to plan. I would say it was a traffic-filled, less than perfect trip for Saxon Warrior. I wouldn't discount them, going forward, and I certainly wouldn't stamp that as a defining race over who's better between Massar and him. There's a lot more racing to be done over there, so we'll have to see how that plays out. Now, getting away from the actual racetrack for a minute, because we always take you past the wire, and you can always find more at pastthewire.com or right here on the Past the Wire YouTube channel. But we're going to go outside of the races now and talk a little bit about a guy named Jim Gaffigan or Garrigan or something like that. I never heard of him before this weekend, and I will lose no sleep if I never hear of him again after this weekend. Apparently, he made some video in comedy for CBS Sports where he knocked horse racing. I didn't even watch it. I have no interest in what this guy says or who he is. But apparently, it caused a flurry on social media of people knocking the guy and bashing the guy, and then people sticking up for him, and it was important, and oh, who cares what he thinks, and we care what he thinks, and oh, he insulted the game, and this and that. I'll move on. I mean, who cares what this guy says or thinks of horse racing? We like what we like, we don't like what we don't like, and these guys are not going to change any opinions. I mean, outside of the people who are involved in racing, we've gotten away from the mainstream, and everybody in the game knows that. Would we like to get back into it? Absolutely. Is this Jim Gaffigan character going to help us? No. Is he going to hurt us? Probably not, because whoever's listening to him won't come to the racetrack anyway. Move on, guy's irrelevant. No. I mean, if I wouldn't have found out who he is and would have went the rest of my life, however long the good Lord decides that may be, and I never heard of this guy, I'd have lost no sleep. I mean, insignificant character. Now, to somebody who I care a little bit more about, only because I think it was a little bit of an injustice as to what happened to him, is a gentleman by the name of Steven Schwartz. Steven Schwartz was a guy who was very active on social media, especially Twitter, in the horse racing community. I think his handle was at Al Bundy Polk High, which I always got a kick out of because I thought Married with Children, for whatever it's worth, was a little bit of a ahead of its time show. It was kind of funny. And I'm a big fan of Peggy Bundy, Katie Segal, who is actually a great actress and a great singer. And if you ever see her in any other roles, you wouldn't believe it's the same lady who played Peggy Bundy. She's amazing, and she could sing like forget about it. But that said, this guy used to ride for Anonymous Racing, very, very reputable website in our game. Dan Tordman started it. He actually started me and Passed the Wire. And he's a really good guy and really good for the sport. And it's hard to find anything to say about Dan. Bad. This guy wrote analysis for him on Saturday. It was free, given out to anybody who wanted to look. If you don't want to look, you don't have to look. It's up to you. But there was, apparently he was a high school principal, I think in the Bronx or something. The New York Post decided this was newsworthy. I mean, they don't write anything about horse racing for who knows how long, and all of a sudden this guy's newsworthy because he was betting horses and tweeting while he was sitting in the principal's office. And apparently teachers turned him in to the Board of Education for doing this. Well, my thought on that is, how many of those teachers are tweeting, Facebooking, texting during the day, during school hours? Horse racing is legal. Betting on horses is legal. You can do it off your phone. If he's getting his work done, who cares? No kids suffered because of this. Principals sit in their office and administer. When I went to high school, which was not as long as I should have, but when I went to high school, I never saw the principal. He was in his office. He dealt with the teachers once in a while and administered, made policies. He wasn't interacting with the kids, except in junior high school. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office, as a lot of us did. But that aside, I mean, this whole thing got blown out of proportion. They vilified this poor guy. They vilified horse racing. All over nothing. Was making a couple of bets during the day and tweeting them out and interacting on social media. I mean, if they had a gripe with his work and they could say, okay, his work suffered because of this or there were some issues, I could see it. But if it was only because he was doing that, no good. And my friend Ed DeRosa over at Churchill Downs and Twin Spires brought out a very good point. If he was tweeting and talking about fantasy football, probably never would have made the New York Post or the papers or been newsworthy, and nobody probably ever would have complained. But racing does have that negative stigma in a lot of places. A couple of places it don't. Saratoga, Hot Springs, places like that. There's no negative stigma with horse racing, and I love those towns because of that. But a lot of other places there is. And that pretty much brings everybody up on all the news that is fit to broadcast. John Stettin, Pass the Wire. PassTheWire.com is my site. Pass the Wire is the YouTube channel. There's more on both always. Big week coming up, leading up into the Belmont. We're going to have an awful lot. So subscribe to the channel if you would. You can get the newsletters and subscribe to the website at PasTheWire.com, so you get all my columns and articles that I write. A couple of really interesting ones coming out in the near future. You'll get my Belmont coverage, and this is the only place where you'll get my opinion if you should want it. So have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the week leading up to the Belmont. We'll spend some more time together, and ciao for now.